Rafael Nadal is one of the greatest legends in tennis history.
Rafael Nadal has announced he may retire from sport next year.
To try to stop, to give myself an opportunity to enjoy next year. That's probably going to be my last year.
Rafael Nadal is cursed. The Spaniard has had a career that is as decorated with stellar performances and trophies as it is with injuries. And right now, it doesn't seem like things would be better for him as he has missed the rest of the 2023 season with injury. So we ask, has Rafael reached his breaking point and should he retire?
Rafael Nadal has announced that he will not be taking part at the French Open this year due to a hip injury.
Rafael Nadal is one of the best tennis players out there, with a total tally of 22 Grand Slams, 92 titles, and 1,068 matches won on tour. Pretty neat, huh? And maybe he would have been more if he hadn't been so unfortunate. Frankly, saying that the man is cursed is an understatement, considering the amount of injuries he has suffered in his career. Any injury you can think of, Rafa has suffered it and more. The man has had knee and foot injuries, stomach virus, tendinitis, hamstring pulls, a wrist tendon tear, and an abdominal muscle strain. Speaking of abdominal muscle strains, Nadal pulled out of a competition because of it. "I made my decision because I believe that I can't win 2 matches under these circumstances," Rafa said at a news conference after injury forced him to pull out from 2022 Wimbledon.
With the pain in the abdominal, I know something was not okay there, as yesterday I said.
The last time an athlete pulled out of Wimbledon before a semi-final or final was in 1931. Even with injuries, Nadal was still getting records. On the injury, the Spaniard said, "I can't serve. It's not only that I can't serve at the right speed, it's that I can't do the normal movement to serve." The athlete was to face Nick Kyrgios in a much-anticipated semi-final showdown, but injuries wouldn't let him. It wouldn't be the last time that would happen, and as painful as not competing was, this wasn't Nadal's most hurtful and interfering injury. It's a theme for him, as sad as that is. There are different periods where the athlete would get ready for a competition, or mid-competition, he gets hurt and wouldn't be able to compete. There was that time he had a nasty stomachache which prevented him from participating in the first Grand Slam of the year, the Australian Open. Honestly, when it comes to his saddest injuries, we can't even rank which one that would be. There was that 2003 injury when he was 17, which marked his debut into a long career filled with injuries. The athlete was forced to shelve his debut in the French Open when he fell on his elbow while he was training for the tournament in Manicourt. He still wouldn't debut in the competition in 2004 when he had an ankle stress fracture while playing against Richard Gasquet at Estoril. The injury ended up costing him a place in Wimbledon and the Athens Olympics. Despite the early French Open disappointments, who would have thought that Nadal would end up winning the most French Open titles ever? If you think those early disappointments aren't enough, then what about the injury he suffered in 2014? The athlete was on a roll in the US Open, and he reached the final against Stan Wawrinka, who he had a perfect record against. The Spaniard had competed against Stan 12 times before that final and had beaten him all those times. Before the match, Rafa felt pain when he was warming up but tried to brush it off. The Spaniard went ahead with the game, and his back kept troubling him until he quit the match. And if you like to watch more content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more. When it comes to troubling recurring injuries, Nadal usually suffers from knee injuries. He had one in Wimbledon in 2014, which forced him to end his quarterfinals against Andy Murray in the 3rd set in 2010. Before that year, in 2008 and 2009, the Spaniard suffered another first French Open setback. He had his first French Open loss when he battled against Robin Soderling. Well, we can't exactly call that a battle, considering that he played that competition and the ones before it with pain in both his knees. Doctors eventually diagnosed that pain as tendinitis, and the injury reoccurred when Rafa played Nikolay Davydenko in the Paris Masters and lost 6-1 in the first set. Eventually, he couldn't compete in Wimbledon because of the injury, and if that wasn't enough, he suffered a setback from tendinitis in 2012. Then, he also had a patella tendon tear. This relapse made Nadal lose to Lucas Rosal-Decides in the second round of Wimbledon and prevented him from competing in the London Olympics and the US Open. At that point, it was Nadal's most significant injury, but his 2023 would show there were worse injuries to come. Those crazy injuries made the forearm issues and dizziness he faced in 2007 look like child's play. "I wasn't grasping the racket very well. I didn't feel anything when I was touching the racket," Nadal said after he resigned from the Cincinnati Masters game against Juan Monaco. "I wasn't feeling very well when I went to the court. On the way, I felt dizzy all the time. It was a tough day. Maybe he'll pick tiredness over the recurring foot injury he suffered a couple of times. The earliest one came in 2006 due to an injury he got on the sole of his left foot. The injury forced him to withdraw from the Paris Masters and ATP Finals. The athlete then spent 3 months on the sidelines, which made him miss the Australian Open. Nadal suffered another foot injury in 2021, and this was intense. Nadal was playing through pain for some weeks. When he cared to do something about it, it turned out that he had the Müller-Weiss condition. That condition was grave for any athlete, as it is a degenerative illness that causes bone weakness in certain places in the foot. The problem was that as long as the athlete continued to exercise, the condition would worsen. This only meant one thing: Rafael Nadal had to retire. Even when he had injured his wrist during a training session in 2014, which saw an end to his wrist health, Rafa didn't even think of retiring. He healed and returned to being a spectator when he had to have an appendix surgery. Even when the wrist injury reoccurred in 2016 at the French Open and he couldn't compete in Wimbledon, the athlete didn't think of retiring. That word was alien to him. He had a terrible patch in 2015 and 2016. People thought that was the end for him. They felt the injuries had caught up with him, but this sensational athlete would win 8 more Grand Slam titles, even leading Novak Djokovic at some point. But honestly, Rafa has to retire. For his own sake, it looks like the Spaniard is losing it, as he had a shock loss to Mackenzie McDonald in the second round of the Australian Open. Unfortunately, this was because of a niggling hip injury that the tennis player was hoping to play through. I had had some discomfort in my hip the last few days, but nothing like what I felt in the match, the athlete said after the match. The unceremonious exit would be Nadal's earliest Grand Slam exit since 2016, and it broke the athlete's wife, team, and ranking. As Nadal lost because of the injury, his wife burst into tears, and his team wore a look of sadness. For Nadal, it wasn't also just another day in the office. I hope it's not serious, because I'm already tired and frustrated with being in injury recovery processes for so much of my career. When Dr. Angel Catoro performed an MRI on Nadal in Melbourne after his loss to Mackenzie, the results were fairly positive. The athlete would likely be out for a minimum of 6 weeks or a maximum of 8. Unfortunately, the injury dragged on and the timeline of return became indefinite. Not only did the Spaniard miss the Madrid Open, he also lost key preparation time for the French Open. Eventually, Rafa had an arthroscopic correction to help him treat the problem of his joint. The surgery meant he would be out for 5 months. The Spaniard was supposed to return in time for the Davis Cup final, which was to begin on November 21st. However, as far as the 2023 season is concerned, Nadal is not only done, but he is also out. The athlete is expected to close his season with his last performance being in January. Nadal has seen his record of being a top player in 18 consecutive years end earlier in 2023, and as things currently stand, he would finish the year at the 664th position in the ATP rankings. This finish would be his worst ever finish since 2002, when he ranked 200 on the ATP rankings. So in 2024, the athlete will retire. If you ask us, he had a miracle career, but for the sake of his health, he has to call it quits. Rafael Nadal has had a long career and a decorated one at that, only that just as he was winning trophies, he was also getting injured. Rafa has had different injuries over the years, and they may have stopped him from becoming the GOAT of the sport, considering he has missed 11 Grand Slams and pulled out of 5. If the sportsman had had fewer injuries, would he have had more Grand Slams, or is this the limit? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to support our channel.